If I were to ask you what the best relationships in fiction were, some of you might point to the rivalries in shonen, or maybe turn to some of anime's best crews or friendships. But how many of these connections are superficial? Think of it from the eye of a writer, an establishment between two characters that has to be entertaining yet still understandable, able to make the viewer feel something when an event happens between the two. This has become the meta in fiction, so much to the point where a series can become lackluster or boring if it doesn't have interesting characters. Or when a writer does try to incorporate a real conversation, it ends up being uninteresting. But the medium of relationships can oftentimes be overturned if an author can somehow find a way to bring life to a real conversation. And what if this dynamic embodied how the audience lives and communicates to one another? What's up, internet? I'm Nikando, and today I want to talk about the anime that represents our real-world relationships. There's a huge list of correctly utilized relationships in fiction. The first one that comes to mind for me is the complicated relationship between Subaru and Emilia, where the writer employs the use of poor communication to divide the two. In Red Dead Redemption 2, the Vanderlyn gang makes use of trust and loyalty to build an emotional foundation. But there's also the ever-changing dynamic with Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us. In the hands of an effective writer, these relationships take a stand and usually are the catalyst for the story itself. But what if these already perfect characters took this one step further, a step above perfection? An anime that would transcend the expectations we had and accurately depicted how we connect with others as humans. Frieren Beyond Journey's End does exactly this. It takes an introspective look at what happens after the hero's journey and reframes the lost relationships that were made along the way. Watching this show for the first time got me thinking about my own friend group and my individual relationships with each of them. There were times where we disagreed on things, misunderstood each other, and couldn't find the words that would help each other in times we needed it most. Which made me realize that most of our connection is based on mutual camaraderie and a disconnection emotionally. And as you might guess, Frieren also has these types of relationships. In literature, there are a lot of ways that this can be outlined, one being through character foils, which accurately depicts a contrast between two characters. A lot of people like to think that a good character has to receive some insane character development to be good, but I'd like to believe that a great character can be formed due to the people around him and their differing views. Some affect a character subtly, and while others can act as a huge change. The author is usually the one dictating this and how often they want to use juxtaposition to make a point. Let's say you wanted to create a fantasy world with your protagonist being an elf that can practically live for thousands of years. This decision already imposes a challenge on the writer, as an elf with that dynamic wouldn't think the same as a human, and in turn creates a contrasting foil if done right. Or what if your main hero was a cowardly warrior that didn't resonate with the party's interest at all? What if your main deuteragonist is so emotionally stubborn due to past trauma? It sounds familiar, right? Almost as if we deal with these people every day. People that are around you that aren't the same and think differently than you. Because relationships like this are major factors for the mood it sets for each scene. The first character foil we see is in Frieren herself, but with a twist that the viewer might not wrap their head around. She starts as a husk of a person going through the motions, but not actually living. But before Frieren can even come to terms with this, their original journey was already over, and the most important person to her had already passed away. This depicts the difference between human and elf. Frieren doesn't understand her emotions yet because she can live for thousands of years, and she can just let time pass for as long as she needs to figure something out, because that's just how her brain works. And it's only after Himmel's last words to Frieren she begins to regret living this way. And I think Frieren's entire character was a genius idea for the story, as it highlights the beauty of human connection, something she desperately wants to understand. For Frieren, Himmel's death extends beyond just simple mourning. It's her reconceptualizing what the relationship truly was and could have been, had she been more attentive to the capricious nature of human lives. Her retelling of their shared paths, finding their old adventures in their new journey, and reliving those moments that show a bittersweet attempt to fill what was missing. She's understanding more about herself as much as she's honoring his memory. But the themes of connection would go nowhere if this was just focused on grieving itself. It's about what's left, the growth through loss, and the way that love itself can shine in a dark moment. Himmel's outlook on life and magic lingers throughout her in that short human moment that she knew him. And just as this clicks with her, she reciprocates this energy by dedicating herself in the pursuit of magic and living. And even though she might not have understood Himmel or humanity during his life, she tries to carry it in her own way, through remembrance of good times and nostalgia of her present-day connections. A kind of love that transcends time, much like Frieren herself. This takes us to the other connections in Frieren. Frieren leverages her knowledge of her experiences with Himmel to her new party companions, Fern and Stark. And much like how Himmel is to Frieren, Stark is to Fern. But even though the writer made it a point to draw parallels between the two, their connections are very different. At heart, Fern and Stark are human and they perceive relationships differently. On the new journey that all of these characters set out on, we get some of the most captivating scenes of human connection that I've ever seen in a series, and it's all built around this idea of effective use of communication. Fern at heart is stubborn, studious, and socially awkward, while Stark contrasts her by being a more extroverted, nervous type, fitting the role of a young male figure. There are a lot of moments in the series where they just aren't honest with each other, but you can tell that they still care. There are a couple scenes that I took note of while watching the series, those being the birthday scenes for both Fern and Stark. We see Fern end up getting mad at Stark because he didn't have her birthday gift planned out in advance, and this annoys Stark because he can't wrap his head around why Fern couldn't understand why he waited. Or vice versa, where Fern wants to give Stark a gift, but Stark shuts her down because he's never formally received one. They both are unable to express how they feel to one another, and from an outside perspective, this can be frustrating. Human relationships will always lead to conflict without proper communication, which can lead to unnecessary tension amongst people. In a perfect world, we're able to get across our thoughts in a way that exactly align with what the other person is thinking. But I don't necessarily believe this is a good thing. I think a good relationship, one jam-packed with flaws and misdirections, are ironically what makes people stronger as long as people are emotionally aware about it. To be able to accept someone else's flaws and move past them is ultimately the strongest kind of connection that creates significance. This is the essence of human relation. Because in the end, both Stark and Fern end up cherishing what each of them got from each other despite what they initially thought. And because of Frieren's intervention, they also address their miscommunications. It's a larger-than-life moment and fantastically written, even though it doesn't really get your adrenaline pumping. And it's all surrounded by this idea of humans forming a connection with one another. Which is so crazy when you think about it, because dialogue like this is just overlooked because on the surface it's just another scene in fiction. Good relationships aren't just a byproduct of camaraderie or even emotional investment. They're a culmination of both. Frieren's first season works so well because it embodies us as people, to show us that human connection that most of us desire. For an anime to come out of nowhere and challenge the big names of the writing world and eventually live up to that name is what completely blew me away. And Frieren's built on this web of interconnected symbolism that just keeps growing and growing on ideas of heroism, purpose, and of course, relationships.